Tim Lowe is the founder of Your Next Jump, a company providing human resources, professional branding, and career coaching services. He is originally from Fishkill, New York, and went to school at Carnegie Mellon for both his undergraduate and master's degrees. Tim has worked over a decade. Let me try that again. Tim has over a decade of experience in business strategy and process improvement. He's worked for several top tier international consulting firms and has been involved in the hiring of many new team members. He volunteers as a mentor to many recent grads and moonlights as a serial entrepreneur. Tim is a certified resume writer and professional career coach. And just a couple of years ago, he and a friend started Your Next Story, a nonprofit organization that provides employment preparation and placement for formerly incarcerated individuals. Wow. Tim, welcome to Hustle and Grace.
Thanks for having me, Hillary. Great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. So as of this recording, we're kind of fully into the great reopening phase of the pandemic. Hiring and work has really transformed over the past 2 years. I remember when I was like an outlier for working from my home office every day. That's totally changed in the career and work landscape. So I'm interested to know from your perspective, you're kind of on the front lines of like what's happening in the career landscape and with people who are job hunting. What are you seeing happening in the hiring landscape right now? What should job seekers expect as they look for new opportunities in this sort of phase of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question, and things are changing even now. People are talking. There's some conversations about the recession, upcoming recession, and maybe some slowdown in hiring. But really, what we've been seeing probably in the last year and a half, 2 years, is a lot of hiring. We've seen a lot of hiring happen across the board at a lot of companies, and I think that is still going to continue at least for a little bit until companies start to see things where they need to pull back. And so a lot of folks, obviously we hear about the great, resignation, a lot of folks leaving. And when you look at numbers and unemployment numbers, right, unemployment numbers are very low, around the 3.5% as of right now in July. But that doesn't account for a lot of folks that, have, maybe gone part-time because, they weren't able to do full-time employment. And then there's a lot of job seekers maybe who kind of left and are contemplating coming back, who really are people that should be counted in those numbers, but just aren't yet. And so there is still a lot of hiring happening. We see companies also being very cautious in a sense about who they're bringing on, even though they're hiring a lot, because they want to make sure that who they bring in is staying. They don't want them to leave. And so what we're seeing a lot now is people who are getting to the interview stage, who are getting to those last rounds, where typically they might go through 3 or 4 rounds of interviews. Even for some more junior positions, we see folks that are getting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rounds of interviews before getting an offer. And so that is happening a lot. I think companies are a little bit more cautious about who they want to bring on. Also, for folks that are in certain industries like tech, for example, a lot of the hiring right now, because it's a sort of a seller's market, right? In terms of you selling yourself into that market, a lot of companies are also willing to pay higher salaries, especially in certain types of industries, especially in tech. They're willing to pay higher salaries, and also to retain folks that are good. So we're seeing folks that are going out, working for a great company now, but are interviewing, getting great offers elsewhere. And, typically when you go to a company, they'll say, oh, okay, well, thanks, but, you can leave, right? But now we're seeing companies trying to retain folks, and they're matching those offers that they're getting outside, matching and even exceeding it. So we've seen that with a lot of our clients, who are really good, but also who are in industries where they really want to retain folks that are just excellent employees. So
That's fascinating. So retention is a big piece of it. So
yeah.
I would love to hear your take on resume writing. You're the resume expert, but I want to know, let me throw you a subversive question. In the age of LinkedIn, like, are resumes dead? Do they matter? Are they being replaced by LinkedIn profiles? Or And also, what are people getting wrong on resumes? Like, give me your hot take on resumes, start to finish.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, no, resumes are still very much the foundational piece of how you would market yourself in the job search. Um, the things that we sort of see on resumes that are sort of typical, I don't want to say problems, but what we see on resumes that don't necessarily help you stand out is most resumes oftentimes read sort of like job descriptions, right? When you look at a resume, people put down, these are my day-to-day activities, these are my roles and responsibilities, this falls under my purview, how many people I manage, size of the budget, these are projects that I lead or the projects that I work on. And so whenever we write a resume for our clients or we help our clients through that process, there's really two goals, right? We don't want the resume just to read like a job description. The resume is really a marketing document. And so we don't want to show people what you do. We really want to show people how well you do it. And so I don't want to know as an HR person that you're an IT project manager. What I really want to know is that you're a damn good IT project manager. And so the question is, how do you show that? Because a good way to test it is if you look at your own resume and you look at, say, your latest role and what you have there on your resume. If you were working at a company and there was another person sitting next to you who had the same title, also IT project manager, you guys oversaw the same staff, everything was the same title, but every morning you're coming to work and you're killing it, but this other guy, he's just not very good. You have to ask yourself a question, could he on his resume write exactly what you have on yours? And if the answer is
Right.
yes, then you are just as competitive, not more competitive than this person, even though you are clearly the better candidate. But I don't know you. If I'm the HR person, I see your resume, I see this person's resume. How do I know that you're the better candidate? And the only way to know that is not just talk about what you do, but you really want to show people how well you do it, the results of your work, right? And so we always create a select accomplishment area under each of the roles to show, look, no matter where you've worked, no matter what you've done, you are somebody who's always figured out a way to do a good job. And therefore, if we hire you, we can feel really confident that you're going to do the same thing for us. Okay, so that's number one. The second goal that we have, and this is really important, is a good resume makes the case that you're the best candidate. We all know that. But a great resume, a really good resume, makes the job of whoever's looking at your resume easy to know that you're the best candidate. Okay, and so that's the big difference. And so what I mean by that is, look, if I'm looking at 2, 3, 4, 500 resumes, I'm probably not going to spend a minute on each resume, right? If I spend a minute on each resume and I have 300 resumes, that's 300 minutes divided by 60, that's 5 hours. No way. The reality is I'm probably going to spend maybe 5, maybe 8, 10 seconds looking at your resume on the initial look. And in those few seconds, I really need you to answer these two questions for me. What is it that you're trying to do? And what do you bring to the table as it pertains to that specific position that you're targeting? And the easier you make it for them to answer those two questions, the more effective your resume is going to be. You want to spoon feed them, not necessarily what you want to say, but what are they looking to hear? And so the reaction you really want when someone looks at your resume is, yeah, this looks a lot like what I'm looking for. Let me take a deeper look. Now they're spending more time on your resume, simply means they're spending less time on someone else's. Now your resume moves on to the next round. And instead of competing against 200, 300 candidates, you're competing against 5, right? And that's the goal. So those are kind of the two goals that we have whenever we work through the resume. Obviously, there's a lot of nuances and kind of tips and tricks that we apply to that and how to achieve those goals. But yeah, you want to make sure that your resume is a marketing document and not just an archive of your work history. So
That's brilliant. So, follow-up question. So, I'm thinking about like the select accomplishments section, which is so great. Does that need to be like numbers driven, like 130% ROI, blah, blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. Like people love to throw out like stats and figures and things like that. Is that the kind of thing that you're envisioning in that section?
So it can be, right? So we have a lot of, clients who will ask us. That's a really common question. I'm not in sales. I didn't
Right.
raise revenue from 2016 to 2018. I can't say that I, exceeded my sales quotas, right? Folks in certain industries, like in sales, if you're good at sales, you can say those things, right? You can say, I've exceeded, 10% of my, 110% of my sales goals, right? And those are kind of easy, right? And those we call measured accomplishments. You can count them. They're numbers, right? But then there's other types of accomplishments which everyone should have, and you kind of want to dig in and think a little bit about it. We call them proven accomplishments. Okay, so measured accomplishments, typically numbers, right, and quantitative things. And then there's something called proven accomplishments. Okay, so let me give you an example of a proven accomplishment. Proven accomplishment could be something as simple as your performance evaluations. look, year after year, I got an exceeds expectations in my performance evaluations, right? I was selected to work on these certain projects. If I was selected, that means someone else wasn't selected, right? We won this award, right? All of those things are sort of measured accomplishments. And so folks like, for example, we work with a lot of teachers that are transitioning out of teaching, right? And they want to go into a new field or whatever, any type of industry where folks are leaving one industry, going into another industry, trying to figure out what skill sets and competencies they have that translate. When we talk about the accomplishments part of it, we always want to show, hey, even if you're leaving your certain field, like even if you're leaving teaching, for example, and you want to go into a corporate role, we don't want to show on your resume that you're leaving teaching because you're bad at it. In fact, we want to show that you're a really good teacher. And therefore, it gives me some level of confidence that if I was to leave, if I was to hire you, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've worked, you're always somebody who figures out a way to do a good job. And therefore, if we hire you, we can feel confident that you're going to do the same thing for us. So we will always want to show, it is really important to show that no matter what you've done, no matter where you've worked, you've figured out a way to do a good job. And so measured and proven accomplishments are sort of two ways of doing that.
Love that. And I'm glad that you brought up teachers because I was just thinking about people transitioning from one career field to another or a different industry or whatever. What do you think? My gut says that personal brand plays a part of this. What matters most when you're talking about taking the leap to a new field or industry? Like, where do you start? What does that process look like?
Yeah,
What's your advice there?
yeah, absolutely. So let me give you an example, actually. So with a teacher, we had a teacher that worked with us about 3.5 years ago. She was a AP English teacher at Thomas Jefferson High School. So here in the Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia, that's like a magnet high school, part of Fairfax County Public Schools. And so English teacher and AP Arts history teacher. Okay. So the resume that we created for her, actually, she used as she landed a position at Booz Allen, which is a consulting firm here, headquartered here in the Washington, D.C. area, international consulting firm. And so the job that she applied for was a communication strategy consultant. Okay. And so they hired her for that position. So the question is, how do you write a resume? Okay. For her, who is a high school teacher, that would make sense in that consulting field, right? And we don't want to, and actually for all of our resumes, whether you're transitioning out of a certain industry or not, for all of our resumes, we don't necessarily want to open up with the professional experience. You have to be 100% honest. You cannot lie on your resume. But at the same time, for her, we didn't necessarily have to lead with the fact that she's a teacher. Okay. So what we wanted to lead with is the skill sets that she has for that position. Okay, so what is that position asking for? It's a communication strategy role. It's a communications role. They want to know, are you a good communicator? Okay, so let me ask you a question. Are teachers good communicators? You better believe it. Teachers are some of the
Sure.
best communicators in the world, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're teaching third grade or kindergarten or you're teaching, college or grad level, classes. Teachers, good teachers, are some of the best communicators in the world. In order to be a good teacher, you have to be a really good communicator. You have to take information, data, and synthesize it in a way that your audience members understand it, whether it's a 6-year-old, 16-year-old, or a 26-year-old, right? And so what we open up with the resume, we open up with a headline, right? We put, instructional leader, communications expertise. Okay. Now, if the job was asking for project management or the job was asking for writing and editing or content development, then we would put instructional leader, content development, instructional leader, project management, right? Expertise. But this particular role, we open up the resume with a big headline, right? And why do we open a resume with a headline? Just like a newspaper, when you open up the Wall Street Journal, there's like 50 articles. Why do you choose to read a certain article? Because of the headline. In the same way, a headline can help highlight those skills and those competencies that they're looking for. And so we opened up her resume, instructional leader, communications expertise, right? So it didn't necessarily look like a teacher's resume right away. And then the first half of the first page, we emphasize all the skills and the competencies that she has. And then about halfway down the first page, that's where we open up with the fact that she's a teacher. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to guide the reader through the resume. So they're looking through it, they see the headline that matches, they see the core competencies, they see the summary. Yeah, all these things match. And then they get to the experience section. Oh, she's a teacher. Okay, but is she a good one? Right? And we want to show through those select accomplishments that she's not leaving teaching because she's bad at it. In fact, she's really good. Therefore, if we hire her, we can feel some level of confidence. And so the person actually hired her, commented on our resume, said, wow, this is really good the way that it's laid out. And she got a lot of really good kudos about her resume. And now actually 3.5 years later, she's the chief of staff for the CIO at Booz Allen. So obviously she's done really well. And it was all her, right? We did a little bit of the work helping her with the resume and help marketing her. But yeah, she's just done really well. But just an example of how quickly you can transition from one to another, not necessarily by focusing on your experience that someone in management consulting is just not going to understand the teaching experience. What they will understand is the skill sets, the competencies. What does she bring to the table in terms of her ability to do those things? So
Absolutely. Speak the language of the person you're trying to live, I guess. That makes me think too of like people taking a career break, or who have a in their resume. I'm deep in the phase of like little kid life, and I think you
yeah,
can relate to that too. You have a baby and then two older kids. I have friends who have had, great careers, very have a lot of experience, and they've chosen to step back from that for a couple of years. And I know that they're going to be interested in getting back to it. I mean, would you say that use that same sort of strategy with, getting back into the workforce, or what would be your advice to someone like that?
yeah, absolutely. For folks that have been out of the workforce, taken a break over COVID, or maybe have chosen to stay home to take care of family members or take care of little kids, now more than ever, and that phrase can be applied to so many different things right now, right? Now more than ever, companies are open to remote work. Now more than ever, companies are open to hiring older people. But now more than ever, using that phrase, um, companies are more willing to hire folks that have a career gap, who have a break, right? And again, same thing, you want to emphasize skill sets. If you've been out of, let's say, IT for a while, right? I mean, that's an area that's changing constantly. I think there are some things that you can do, maybe some certifications. You don't necessarily have to go back to school, but some things that are not necessarily easy, but can be rather quick, right? You can get your PMP rather quickly, project management professional. You can get a Scrum certification pretty quickly. There's a lot of different certifications you can get. If you were in HR, maybe you want to get back into it, you have a gap, you can go through SHRM and get a certification with Society for Human Resources Management, right? All of those things can help you pivot back into the space again. But again, employers are less likely to balk at a gap in someone's resume now than ever before. And sometimes I've seen people put in the resume just a simple line, 2017 to 2022, full-time caretaker for a family member, right? And those are good things. Those are good things. Those aren't things that you should try to hide. Those aren't things that you should, be ashamed of. Those are things that. And what's more noble than taking time off to take care of a loved one, right? I mean, that's one of the best things you can do in your life. And so I think be proud of that, own that, but at the same time, look for ways that you can pivot back, right? And those certifications, all of a sudden you have a certification that was granted in 21 or 2022, right? All of a sudden, it makes you relevant right again, right? Or a little bit more relevant, or things like that. So that's on your resume. And then the other way to do it also, resume is one piece. That's how you market yourself, right? The component that you're handing out, that's the flyer, right? But then you have the sales pitch, which is really how do you run the job search? And so we break down the job search into what we call the air war and the ground war. The air war is you going on LinkedIn, Career Builders, whatever, ZipRecruiter, submitting your resume and kind of waiting to hear back. That's just putting the flyer in the mailbox, right? Whereas if you're going to knock on the door and have a conversation with somebody, that sales, all of a sudden your sales pitch has a much higher chance of returning on something. And so we always encourage all of our job seekers to run what we call that ground war. And that's why tools like LinkedIn are really important. You're connecting with folks, not asking for a job, but you're asking for conversations, right? And so let's say you want to work at Booz Allen, okay, or Capital One. You look up Capital One, you find someone who's in that field, maybe a director, VP. Just reach out to them. You're not asking for a conversation. You're not asking for a job. I've heard some great things about Capital One. The culture there is really great. I love the innovations and things that you're doing in this area. Looking to transition back into the workforce. Would love to just chat with you, learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing there. 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10 people respond. But when they do, you've essentially invited yourself into an informal interview. And then you say, oh, hey, John, it was really good chatting with you back in July. It was so nice learning about your background and what you guys are doing at Capital One. I saw this job posting. I thought I might be a really good fit. You've already earned the right to ask that that next follow-up. And then they're like, oh yeah, hey Hillary, yeah, send me your resume. I know Susan who oversees that. All of a sudden, John is passing your resume to Susan, right? And internally, your chances of getting an interview or even getting a job is much higher than you submitting your resume and trying to fight through 400 other resumes that are being submitted. So
That's great. One other question about job hunting.
yeah,
uh, in this age in which someone might go through, like you just said, you might have 6 or 7 interviews. Sometimes people might work for a company that they don't live anywhere near their boss or their headquarters or whatever. What are your tips for really connecting and standing out if all you're getting are like Zoom interviews and you're not meeting someone in person? Like, how do you build that affinity and that connection?
yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, you're limited, right? You're limited in that, in person is just always going to be better. I know, even as, owning my own company, we're essentially virtual in terms of how we work with one another. We're all of us are remote, but every once in a while, we want to get together, and I make it a point for us to get together in person and even have a working session. We have one of our lead, director of writing works in Kansas City. We'll fly her in about twice a year to just sit down and work side by side to kind of work through things. She knows what she needs to do, right? It's not the day to day, but it's really talking about vision and talking about what's the purpose of this, and encouraging people to understand, why is this important, right? And without seeing face to face, it's hard to do that sometimes. But when you do an interview, I think same thing. I mean, just like you would in a regular interview, you want to prepare, right? Make sure you're in a quiet space. Make sure that things are blocked out. Make sure there's no technical issues with connections and all of those really kind of things that could distract from from that interaction. I think at the same time, just like a regular interview, you also want to prepare ahead of time, read what's going on, not just, with the job description, which is super important to read ahead of time and make sure you're familiar with it, but also understanding, what is the direction of that company? What are they doing? And there's so many things that are available, especially for publicly traded companies. You can see so many of the things that are going on. Just read the report, right? Spend a little time doing that. And then, of course, same thing. You want to dress, and it's okay to overdress unless they, specifically tell you to wear, certain type of clothing. I think bring some respect to the table, not just for yourself, but for them as well too. So just like a regular interview, dress up in a suit, even if you're wearing shorts underneath in the Zoom call. I think those things are really important. But I think 2.5 years into this pandemic, I think people are used to it. I think it's not unique doing Zoom interviews. So I think main thing is just make sure all those other little distractions, all those other issues don't pop up as much as possible, mitigate that risk, and try to bring some personality to the interview as well too, right? People love, even for competence and technical questions, people love to see emotions, right? Where you're talking about, I'm passionate. I love project management. I love the intersection of managing the budget and the schedule and the scope and making sure that those things don't overspill. And one of my biggest passions is, seeing those things come together as a plan, right? You want to bring that passion as much as you can, because you're going to see it's harder to convey that online than it is in person. So don't worry about trying to overdo it a little bit online. Compensate for that a little bit, and so that you try to build that connection as early as possible. So
That's great. So bring a little energy and
yeah,
make sure you're in a quiet place.
yep,
Don't be afraid to dress up. I love all of that. So bring it, home to, your life outside of, just your expertise. You're a dad of 3, you're an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. No doubt sometimes it feels like there's not enough time to run a business and be the kind of parent you want to be. So what is your approach to that tension? Like, what do you have a philosophy or what is your approach to that challenge?
yeah. I'll let you know when I figure it out. But um, yeah, I mean, I think especially if if you're in a relationship, obviously my wife is amazing. She's so supportive of all that I do. My wife worked full time throughout the whole pandemic, and then we had the baby, and she's already met with her boss talking about going back, but she wants to go back in a part-time status and trying to work out if there's work from home options and making sure that she doesn't have to go into the office all the time. So I think there's always that balance, with your spouse or your partner, trying trying to figure those things out, making sure that you're communicating well with them, and also with kids. I think, I'm not a parenting expert at all, but I think kids like structure, or I don't know if kids like structure, but kids thrive in structure, I
They
think.
need it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they need it. They need to know what's going on. To some degree, they kind of need to know what to expect, right? Especially for young kids, having the nap time all the time at the same time, and knowing where things are, and things like that. I think creating those types of structure and creating order in your home, I think is always beneficial, right? And whenever there's disorder, even a messy room kind of mentally kind of messes with people. Like for me, if I walk into a messy room, if my office is messy, I'm just less productive to begin with. And so I think a lot of that in planning is really important. I have a big whiteboard in my office where I plan out sort of long-term, and then long-term vision, and then sort of short-term. What are the 2, 3 things that I need to get done today, right? What is the win for today? And I think taking one day at a time always is really, really important. Um, like putting structure also into your own life of how you do certain things. For example, with our job seekers, right? There was a guy that was, we helped him with his resume and all this stuff. And he said, look, I need to put structure and rigor and discipline into my own job search. And this is what he did. He had 2 cups, right? He had 2 little cups like this. And he put 50 paper clips into 1 cup. And he had this on his nightstand. And it was always a visual reminder before he went to sleep, or as he's getting ready for bed, he can see these things. And what he had told himself was, before my head hits this pillow every night, um, I need to move these paper clips one at a time into the other cup. And each movement of one paperclip represented applying for a job or connecting with someone on LinkedIn or whatever. And so he can visually see, and he didn't have to say, look, I got to apply to 200 jobs or whatever. He just said, every day I got to do 50 of these things. And these things are clearly defined as connecting with someone, doing that ground war, or applying for a job or whatever it is, right? And so before his head would hit the pillow, he would do those 50 things, right? And a lot of times we're like, oh yeah, I got to find a job. These are the things I got to do, all these things. But break it down into those little steps, and break it down into the little things that you need to do day to day, and focus on just doing that. Instead of focusing on, I need to get a job, focus on, I need to do these 50 things, because I know that these 50 things are going to help me get a job eventually, right? Because job searching is one of the hardest things, because there's no end in sight, right? Even when if you play basketball, right, or you play hockey or whatever, and you're part of a league, there's a championship in sight. Even that, there's a schedule, right? You know that the playoffs are coming up. If we make the playoffs, we're going to do this, this, and this. Job searching, people ask you all the time, how's your job search going? You're like, how do I know how my job search? Until I find a job,
Right.
right? It doesn't
It's
matter
going.
it doesn't matter how my job search is going until I actually find a job, right? And so there's no light at the end of the tunnel until there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And so that's why it's so important, especially when you're job searching, to make the win. You have to have little wins, because if you don't have little wins, you're going to be discouraged very, very quickly. And so those little wins have to be those day-to-day things that you've committed yourself to doing. And you can sleep well once you've done those 50 things, because that's the only thing that's in your control. Nothing else is in your control. And especially with job searching, so many things are outside of your control. How many other people are applying? Do they have an internal candidate already? Is this person interviewing? Is he gonna have a bad day? Am I gonna have a bad day? Like, so many things are just outside of your control. So look at the things that you can control, focus on those, and make that a win. So I don't know if maybe I didn't answer your question, but hopefully
That's
that's,
great. That's
yeah.
great. Make that a win. I think that you make a really good point, that sometimes we can get so focused on these big things that we need to accomplish over long term that we don't think about, okay, what do I need to do to make today right?
Yep.
What are the small things? I love a checklist. And if I can turn some big goal or some big value into a checklist, like I put my phone in a drawer and I was with my kids on the floor for 20 minutes. Maybe it's just that, whatever it is, like those things, whether it's that or it's reaching out to someone on LinkedIn or reaching out to someone to grab coffee or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
turning, these big aspirations into practical things that you can check off a list, I think is really helpful.
Yeah.
Tim,
Absolutely.
this has been fantastic. I want to make sure that people can find you and find your next jump. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, so a few different places. So you can go to our website. If you go to yournextjump.com, yournextjump.com, that's my company. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. So I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, not so much on other social media networks, trying to be a little bit better with that. But definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. If you join, on our website, once you start connecting with us, we have a lot of free resources. The two sort of main things that we do, or actually really the main thing that we do that's a free resource is we run a webinar once a month. In fact, we run two different webinars right now. We have one that is just our ongoing one, which is called Get Hired. So you can register for it if you go to yournextjump.com/get hired, GETHIRED, no spaces. You can register for that. And that's a 1.5 hour long webinar. It's free. I know the last thing you probably want to do is hop on another Zoom call, but we've had over 5,000 folks attend this webinar throughout the last 2 years. 99% of people who log in stay until the very end,
Wow.
and even through some of the question and answers. So we talk about things like salary negotiations, tough interview questions, job search, ground war, air war, and of course resume writing as well too. And then we run a version for transitioning teachers, called Life After Teaching. Same thing, yournextjump.com/life after teaching, all one word. And so we've had a lot of educators that are looking to transition out of education that have reached out to us, and we've just decided to offer this, as a free webinar. So there's no purchase obligation or anything like that, but hopefully if you attend any of them, you'll find them to be really helpful. And then of course we have newsletters and things as well that go out where we talk a little bit about stories. We talk about the paperclip story, just little things that are kind of hopefully encourage and inspire folks, especially during the job search. That's one of the times when folks feel the most anxiety, right? Because you don't know what's happening, and you don't feel confident. And so the whole point of Your Next Jump was to give folks that are looking for jobs some level of confidence. Can someone come alongside you, put their arm around you, and say, hey, it's going to be okay. I can't tell you when you're going to get the job. I can't tell you all these other things, but here are things that you can do to help increase your chances, that are industry best practices that we've run across with HR folks, that we know that this is what they're looking for in general. Here are some ways to improve your presentation and give you a little bit of leverage, because everyone has some type of leverage. Let's just make sure that you're maximizing that leverage. So
Fantastic. All right. Yournextjump.com. Thank you so much, Tim.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Hillary.